So, good evening. Let us discuss about 29th newspaper. Now, the first article is about seniority versus merit, the eternal article in public administration. Now, till now, the collegium system it has believed in seniority, and now what the government argues is the excessive reliance on seniority has compromised on the merit. Now, what the Supreme Court said is, what the judges said is, the merit has some element of subjectivity in that and it may tinker with the independence of judiciary. On the other hand, the seniority has something called objectivity and easy to assess for. So in this context, this particular debate has come up. So if you take in the United States of America, where there is no philosophy of basic structure of the Constitution, an young judge may become the Chief Justice if he is meritorious. But no such a situation exists in India. But however, the lack of objectivity in determination of the merit and which provides for huge scope of action for the executive in determining the merit may compromise with the independence of the judiciary. So in this context, the section 5(1) of the National Judicial Appointments Commission Act was also questioned with regard to the CJI appointment. What it says is, the senior most judge of the Supreme Court will be appointed as CJI provided he is fit. What is the meaning of this fit is not been clearly spelled out. And next article is, the center wants to make the states responsible for the communal peace. Because the law and order being the state subject, obviously maintaining of the communal peace also comes under the state domain of action. But if you carefully observe that the Indian Federation is called as a cooperative federation because there are two series of articles. Whenever there is an agrarian distress, the center said that agriculture is a subject of the state list. Whenever there is a law and order disturbance, center said it is in the state list. And there is something called a shift of blame from center to the states on these issues. If you carefully observe, after the BJP has come up, we can see this series of events or series of attacks on minority religious institutions. Now in this context, remember that anything in our federation, it depends upon a close collaboration and working between the center and the states. Center passing the responsibilities to the state is not within the philosophy of the cooperative federalism in India. The next is Modi and Ghani. Mr. Ghani has visited finally India, and what are the things happened, during Ghani's visit? So the first thing is Motor Vehicle Act. No agreements have reached on the first day. They think that the Motor Vehicles Act is going to come up. Added to that, India can expedite the process with regard to the Chabahar port, which provides an alternate access to Afghanistan trade. And the second thing is, India also said it is keen to join in Afghanistan-Pakistan transit trade agreement, which will allow for the Afghanistan trucks and Afghanistan goods to be marketed in India. And added to that, what Ghani expressed is, so the Afghanistan wants to become a center for the regional cooperation, which can bring in connectivity between the Central Asia and South Asia. The energy-rich Central Asia can supply the energy-starving South Asia through Afghanistan. These are the interests which are expressed by Mr. Ghani. And added to that, the voice of Ghani has changed towards Pakistan. And he blames more the Islamic State as is going to be more dangerous. And he did not talk much about Taliban and LET because he wanted to have reapproachment to the Taliban. The next is the China versus India, a comparison. And what this Arvind Veermani's article says is, India can surpass the Chinese growth process. And the GDP gap, which is around 2.4 times in real GDP on PPP terms, now it can be improved further. Now if you can carefully observe that the real GDP can be improved further, especially if you observe there are various variables which are being talked by Mr. Arvind Veermani. Now, normally, if you observe, that is the countries, normally the countries which are in the low per capita income stages shows the high growth. Once they reach the middle and higher per capita incomes, their growth story is going to come down. Now China, in spite of reaching into the middle income level, it was able to sustain the growth for almost 3 decades. Now this has made the forecast of the China about the China wrong many a times. Now on the further, now especially the Chinese growth story is coming down. It is because of its very model, that is export model of growth. The slowing down of world trade is have an impact on its growth. The government efforts to tackle this particular slowdown of growth by free flow of debt, it is creating a kind of bubble in China, and this debt to GDP ratio is increasing now, and this increase in debt to GDP ratio may finally lead to breakdown of the bubble, which further decrease the growth of China to 4 or 5%. Now, the further thing is, if you compare the various indices of the growth in this particular area, there are three major things which are being compared. The gap between FDI GDP ratio, export GDP ratio, import GDP ratio, all of them are coming down. Now, for example, FDI GDP ratio, previously it is around 3%, now it has come down to 2%. Export GDP ratio is less than 1%. And it means that the competitiveness of the Indian economy and also openness of the Indian economy is increasing. Now, the reform process which is undertaken in India recently, and also the changes in the assessment of the GDP with 2011 as the base year, all can make the IMF predictions of 7.5 to 8% growth prospects for India very much optimistic. And if India's growth is increasing, on the other hand China's growth comes down, then there will be a meeting point with regard to the GDPs of both these nations. So this is what is the essence of the article. Let me repeat again. Now the GDP gap is around the 2.4. The Chinese GDP in real terms on PPP, purchasing power parity, is 2.4 times higher than India. And the Chinese model is export-led growth model. And this model automatically comes down whenever there is a recession. So in this context, the recent global slowdown is going to slow down the growth story of the China. And the second thing is, whenever the countries move from low per capita incomes to higher per capita incomes, the cost of production will increase, generally competitiveness decreases, and in the process, the country's growth story is also decreases. In spite of China maintaining a good growth story for 3 decades, now it is on a downturn. Now again, if you compare various variables such as FDI GDP ratio, export GDP ratio, import GDP ratio, the Indian economy is showing greater competitiveness and openness compared to the Chinese economy. So if we compare all these things, and one more warning he gave over here is, the China in its desperation to bring back the growth, it is creating a debt bubble within the Chinese economy which can explode at any point of time. So, if India is on right path of reforms, and if it can restructuralize its economy, then achievement of the growth is not a big hurdle for India. Next is with regard to the killing of country's ecology. So what is the talks about environmental impact assessment in our syllabus? Now in the earlier environmental assessments, each project was treated as a standalone without taking cumulative effect of all the projects together. In this context, Supreme Court ordered for the appointment of an expert committee, and this committee has to look into the cumulative effect of the projects on the stability of Himalayan ecosystem and rivers. So what this committee said is, it is about the particular projects, hydroelectric projects, are disturbing the entire Himalayan ecosystem, and they have irreversible negative impact on the environment and its wildlife. Added to that, the entire Himalayas fall in seismic zones 4 and 5. So there is a huge catastrophic possibility in the Himalayas because of these hydroelectric projects. So the only way the article suggests is to scrap down these projects. But however, the environmental ministry is actively giving permissions, which is condemned by this article. And Narega is the only way of insurance. Now, in a recent World Bank, what it said is the increasing demand for the jobs under Narega, it shows that the growing agrarian distress on the rural side in India. If you observe, Narega is the only insurance available in India for the distressed people. So, in this context, the major reasons for low impact of the MG Narega than expected, there are few things. One is the supply side is too slow to respond. It means the government is not immediately responding to the needs of the people. Second, workers are not given the full pay which the law prescribes for them. And three, there are huge delays with regard to the payment to the workers. So these are the articles which we need to talk about. And another thing is, in Sri Lanka there is a 19th Constitutional Amendment Act which is passed, which has curtailed the powers of the president. So these are the few things which are reported in the today's newspaper articles. So thank you very much.